The first non-clothing simulation I did with Cloth Effects, which was actually called Stitch at the time, was a chain link, a set of chain links all together. And basically, there really is no other way to do it this easily and this quickly. The simulations are very fast because all you're simulating is a quick plane. You're not simulating all the inner collisions between the objects. You can use Reactor, I'm sure, to do it. You can use any hard body dynamics sim to do it, but nothing will be as fast as using just a plain old cloth sim. And it should be able to cover you most of the time. Even if you were to take it and pile it up in a pile, it should still work. So I'm going to go ahead and show you my process of doing it, very quick and very easy. And I'm just going to start with the torus, which I have here. The radius 1 is 0.7 and the radius 2 is 0.3. It's important to know exactly what they are because you'll see later actually. I've got the segments at 16 and the sides at 12. I wanted it to have some detail, but then I wanted to keep it as low as I could. Basically, so you get better viewport playback when you play back. And then when you get closer, when you throw mesh smooth on it or turbo smooth, it'll keep its shape and won't, get all soft on you. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse this to an edible poly. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these faces and I'm going to detach them. Oops. Go ahead and detach these faces into a new object. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this side and take this side right here, and I'm going to move it from this vertex to this vertex so that they're right on top of each other, so the insides of the chain radius are touching. So let's go ahead and just move this in the negative 1.5x direction and then go back and attach these two back together into one link. I'm going to go to my border selection and I'm going to go bridge, and I want 2 segments. That's going to help when you do the mesh smooth or the turbo smooth. So we'll go OK, and then we'll leave sub-object mode. I'm going to grab all these faces and I'm going to re-smooth them, turn off the smoothing groups, clear them all, and set them to 1 because you just want to have one nice smooth object. So the next step, now that we have one link, is to go ahead and make a duplicate of it, and we're going to go ahead and move that also 1.5 in the negative x direction. So now that these 2 points are butted up right next to each other. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees around X. So now I have one pair of chain links. The next step is to make a plane. Now this plane is going to be the basis of our cloth driver object. I'm going to go ahead and make the length 0.6 and I'm going to make the width 1.5. So now that 1.5 is going to go ahead and line up with this distance here. So I'm going to go ahead and align this center to center like this. So you can see that these edges are touching perfectly, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make a duplicate of that object, say copy, and I'm going to move that also 1.5 in the negative x direction. So now I have 2 links and I have 2 faces basically, which are going to represent my cloth driver. The next step is to make duplicates or copies of these in a chain. Basically, 2 links isn't going to make a chain. So we'll go ahead and we're going to open up, we're going to use the spacing tools. And I'm just going to draw a quick line to use as a path for a direction for the spacing. So I'll grab that and let's make 30 links, which I already have. And the spacing is going to be 3 inches, which is 1.5 times 2, obviously. So I'm going to pick the path. I'm going to say that right there and go apply. And go ahead and close that. We can delete these right now if we want. Now the next step is to take these chain links right here, and I'm going to rotate these 45 degrees. The reason is you can see that the plane right here is flat. Now if I run this simulation and I have a box, say, I have a ground like this. If I run this simulation just like this, then this plane is going to stop, it's going to fall a little bit, and then it's going to stay right here. So if I didn't rotate these, then they'd be standing up on end like that. So now that I've rotated them, they're going to be standing like that. Just makes more sense when you actually run the sim and see what it's going to look like. Okay, so now that I've done that, I can actually go ahead and freeze those. And I'm just going to delete this line right here and grab one of these faces and collapse that to the editable poly, and then hit attach list, and then select all the rest of these planes. So now I have one object with a whole bunch of verts in it. So let's go ahead and grab all these verts and hit weld, and make sure you're as low as you need to be. So now they're all, you don't have any duplicate verts, so it's one solid mesh. See what I mean? Okay, so now that we have that set up, we're going to select these chain links, and we're going to go to Effect Pivot. So Effect Pivot only. And you can see that they're all rotated and wild and crazy. And what we want to do is we go Align to World. I'll show you why in a second. I'm going to go ahead and hit Center our Object, although that's not as important. Now the reason I did that is a secret, and I'll show you later. So now we're going to make a duplicate of this object right here. Okay. And we're going to take the first one, and I'm going to go ahead and put mesh smooth on it. A mesh smooth of 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and mesh smooth this in iteration of 1. Very important you turn off isoline display, because we're going to go ahead and collapse this. If you don't turn off isoline, it's crazy. You'll see what happens if you just try it. So we've got our plane. Now this is going to be our cloth driver. Okay, this is going to be what's driving the simulation. The reason I put so many faces is it'll allow the sim to kind of work with some extra faces. Sometimes you can get it where if you just use this object and you end up with, let's say you had a sharp or a small cylinder. Say you had a cylinder like this, right? And you had the chain fall on there. And if it was to fall right here, it would basically pass right through that face because there's no verts touching it. You see what I'm saying? But in the case of having these extra verts here, it'll have a vert to hit. Now, I'll show you how we're going to do that in a sec. What we're actually going to do is we're going to take the one that's the lower poly one, and we're going to skin wrap that to the one that has the mesh smooth collapsed into it. Okay, so for right now, I'm going to go ahead and hide that. Actually. So this is going to be our cloth object, and this is driving our sim. What we're going to need to do first is we're going to grab all of these objects right here, all these chain links, and what we want to do is we want to get them attached to this surface here, this plane. So there's a script on the DVD called sorry about that, I completely forgot where it was. Sorry. It's called Attach to Surface by Local Z. So we'll go ahead, and while all of these objects are selected, we hit that, and then we select our plane driver. And what it'll do, as you'll see in a second, is it's going to go ahead and shoot a ray from the Z of each of these objects, and then wherever it hits that mesh, it's going to create a point and then link that object to that point. So now if I take this right here and move it, it's locked. If I take this and move it, you can see that they're moving with that link. So a good example, I can just go ahead and throw, say, a bend modifier on it, kind of give you an idea of what I mean. So you see what I'm saying? It's now driven by that mesh. That's why those verts had to be, the faces had to be the exact right size. And you'll see exactly what I mean when I actually drop this on a cylinder and have it form around it. There are also other pluses to having a separate object that is not actually being driven by the sim, but a skin wrap to it. And I will show you that in a moment. So right now we've got this object right here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through applying cloth effects to it. So go ahead and put the cloth effects modifier. And then we'll go to object properties. Now the settings I want to use, I'm going to make it a cloth object, right? And I'm going to set the UV bend to 50 because I don't want it to bend too easily. And we're going to set the curve to 5. And we're going to set the UV stretch to 600 because I really don't want this to stretch. And we're going to set the shear to 600 because I don't want it to shear at all. The density we're going to increase to 0.01. And the dampening we're going to increase to 0.1. The repulsion, and that's only if you're going to have the chain hit itself, we're going to increase that to 5 and make the thickness 2. The thickness being the thickness of the cloth object. That way when it hits if it hits itself, it'll hit it so that the links don't interpenetrate, that they bounce off of each other basically. And I'm going to leave all the settings as they are. And I'm going to turn on edge springs, which is going to keep the edges from pulling apart. You don't want the chain links to actually pull apart from each other. It's very important, obviously, because they wouldn't. So go ahead and say OK. And then I'm going to set my gravity to -3000 because I want these chain links to look heavier. Now you're probably wondering why I don't just increase the density. Okay. By increasing the density, all you're really doing is increasing the momentum of the object. So if you had something falling over a cylinder and it had higher density, it would swing and swing and swing and swing. It would keep going. But if you were to just leave that density number alone and increase the gravity, once it falls over it would swing and then stop pretty quickly. I know there's other ways that you can do it, but this has always just worked perfectly for me. I don't like to play with the dampening number very often, and I know that's where you would pretty much do that, but I personally just like to play with the gravity. This way, if you have multiple sims, the reason you'd want to use multiple sims is you can have different gravities for different objects. So let's just go ahead and do that. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a cylinder. And we're going to basically drop this chain onto this cylinder right here. So we'll do that. And then I'm going to create basically a floor. We'll go ahead and move this down here. It doesn't need to be that thick. Okay. So let's go ahead and add these objects to the sim. And we'll go to Object Properties. And we'll make the box and the cylinder collision objects. And we'll set the offset to 1. We'll just leave it there. And the depth as well. Okay, so now if we take this cloth object, we'll turn off the sewing spring stuff. I'll leave self collision off for right now. We'll just turn on solid collision. So we're going to set the subsamples to 10 in this example because we really want it to look at we want it to really look at the motion that's happening here. So the one thing that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to go into Object Properties, and I want to use solid friction on the cloth object, and I want to change the friction on the box, which is the floor. You increase it to, say, the dynamic friction to 0.5. Sorry, and the static friction to 0.6. So say OK, and then we'll erase the simulation that I just tested. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and rotate this just slightly, just like so. And let's do that. Okay, so we'll go to front view, and I'm going to go ahead and show my frozen objects. And we're going to go ahead and run this sim, and I'm going to actually let you watch this sim happen rather than pause it. And you can kind of see how quickly the sim can run. And you can see how the offset is working exactly the way it should, so you can see exactly what's happening. And then you get that happening. Most likely because I set the static friction up too high, or I played with it too weirdly. So let's go ahead and cancel that. We'll say erase, and go to object properties, and change the static friction, or the dynamic friction, to 0.2 rather than 0.5. So erase, simulate, and just wait. I mentioned earlier that maybe I didn't mention earlier, but I have used the exact same process to do chainmail, and not just little fake chain, but actual chain links that are driven instead of a plane that is one face wide and a whole bunch of faces long. Instead of using that, I actually used a plane that was 50 by 50 and in little rings, and the rings all met where the faces, separated. That way, when the chainmail actually went over an arm or a bicep or a leg or another object, it would actually hold its shape and look really cool. I'm most likely going to do that tutorial as well, so look for it on the DVD, and if it's not there, then I didn't have time to do it, but hopefully I will. So let's go ahead and hit cancel, because I think this is pretty much close to being finished. And let's unfreeze this stuff. And I have edge faces on for some reason. So go ahead and hit play. And you can see how quickly that can move. Just hiding everything I don't need to see right now. And we'll go ahead and hit play. And you can see how quickly that can run. Now if I go ahead and just move this right here, I'm going to show you another trick. Let's grab this object right here. And we're going to erase the simulation. And I'm going to run the simulation one more time. And I'm just going to go ahead and stop it right there real quick. And as you can see, it's off just a little bit. Now rather than having to resim this every single time, I'm trying to figure out exactly what the magic number needs to be. If you were to run into a situation like this where all you had to do was move it just slightly, all you would need to do is take this object, which is what the chain links are actually attached to, and throw a push on it, and just bring it in a little tiny bit. Now you'll notice that they ended up separating just slightly, or you can bash them together. But when you're this far away, who's going to notice, right? So it's just one of those little tricks that'll get you by, so you can get away with stuff like that. Real simple, real easy sim to do, to set up. And then just by tweaking with the gravity, you can make the chain look heavier, or seem heavier, seem lighter. you can make the difference between, you know, like cast iron chain links, steel chain links, and plastic chain links, just by changing the gravity. So if I was to say change the gravity to 4,000 and run the sim again. Now I'm doing this blind. I haven't done this one with this file before. You can see it falls a lot quicker. We'll just let that continue. Oh, look at that. So let's run the sim. I'm going to go ahead and just move this out of the way. Just want you to see the difference when it falls. So we'll just run that again. And you can see how just by increasing the gravity, you can increase how much heavier the object looks without having to change the density and figure out what the density setting should be. So go ahead and cancel, and we'll just play this real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and continue the simulation. I'm going to pause right now so you don't have to sit here and stare at this. And I'll be back in a sec. Okay, so the simulation is done, and it took about 3 minutes and 50 seconds, something like that. And here's what it looks like. Actually, get you nice and close. And if you hit play, you can see it looks nice and heavy, and it'll come to rest pretty quickly. And that's just by changing the gravity to 4,000 instead of 3,000. So you can do whatever you want. Again, this is just another quick way that you can do chains. You can do the exact same process to do ropes, to do stirrups on a horse. You know, just connect one end to the reins or to the bridle, the other end to the character's hands. If you had a character tied in a chain, you could just use that plane and wrap it around the character. And use the body as a collision object. I mean, the possibilities are endless. You can do it any way you want. If you play with the offset settings correctly, you can actually get this chain to puddle up, you know, just pile up on top of itself, and it'll still look really cool. So that's it for this tutorial. Many more to come.